Everyone, welcome back to the Wellness Paradox podcast. I'm so grateful that you joined us on this journey towards greater human flourishing. As always, I'm your host, Michael Stack, an exercise physiologist by training and a health educator and a health entrepreneur by trade. And I'm fascinated by a phenomena that I call the wellness paradox. This paradox, as I view it, is the trust, interaction, and communication gap between our fitness and wellness professionals and our medical professionals. This podcast is all about closing off that gap by disseminating the latest, most evidence-based, and most engaging information in the health sciences, all in the service of giving fitness and wellness professionals more knowledge and more skills to have a successful career that is stable and can allow them to help as many people as they possibly can. And to provide that information in today's episode, we're joined by Sarah Marion from Murphy Research. This will be a very interesting conversation because Sarah is a data analyst looking at the state of America's health. And this is a specific research program that's put on by Murphy and has been going on since 2018 and looks at trends on a macro level with regard to fitness, with regard to nutrition and other health behaviors. And we're going to dive into some of the data from the most recent reporting from this data set. And I think this is a fascinating conversation that provides a lot of good, tangible information to inform industry trends in the coming years and also inform some of our current objectives, both as business owners and then also as individual fitness and wellness professionals that are working on the front lines in our industry. This is definitely a fascinating conversation that allows us to peer into the future a little bit to understand the trends and the needs of the consumers that frequent our businesses. Any additional information from this episode can be found on the show notes page by going to wellnessparadoxpod.com/episode 39. Please enjoy this conversation with Sarah Marion. Today, we're so delighted to be joined by Sarah Marion. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
This is going to be an interesting discussion. Sarah is a research analyst, and we're going to dive into some statistics and some data around what's happening in the fitness and the wellness industry. And I actually heard Sarah speak down in Nashville at the Club Industry Executive Summit, and she provided some fascinating data that I really thought can help inform practice for a lot of professionals in the industry for the coming years. And that's what I wanted to talk to Sarah about today. So we're going to dive into all of the great data. But before we get into that, Sarah, why don't you just tell us a little bit more about your background to provide some context for our discussion?
Sure. So I am the director of syndicated research at Murphy Research. We are a full service market research firm. The bulk of our business is kind of typical custom market research. We service a broad variety of clients and kind of industrial sectors, but I do the syndicated arm of the business. And we have kind of multiple research programs, but kind of the biggest one is the State of Our Health syndicated tracker, where we are tracking on a continuous basis Americans' attitudes, approaches, behaviors toward health in general, but then specifically fitness, food, and mindfulness. Mm-hmm. I actually am a cultural anthropologist. I have a PhD in cultural anthropology. I wanted to be a professor for many years, but going through graduate school, kind of the what would I say? I became a little bit disillusioned with what my career path could be in academia. And so eventually made the switch over to market research as I was in the course of writing my dissertation. But I consider myself a social scientist, and I bring that kind of anthropological background to the research that I do now.
That's awesome. And I love that background. And it's actually a very unique background to have associated with our industry. I was very excited and heartened by the fact that we have somebody like you and your colleagues who are doing this work in our industry. Just to touch on it a little more, how long has Murphy Research been doing this type of exploration into the state of our health? How long has this been ongoing for? Give us just a little bit of context for that.
Yeah, so State of Our Health, we started collecting data in 2018. Uh-huh. And it's a quantitative online survey, and we collect data from 1,000 unique consumers every month, which means it's 12,000 over the course of a year. And going back to 2018, that gives us now a pretty large data set of well over 40,000 completes. And the kind of continuous nature of that data collection makes it unique in that we can see trends kind of in real time. And so it's been very useful. Obviously we didn't know a pandemic was coming, but since it started, this has been a really great data set to understand how our behaviors and attitudes have really shifted, what's went up and went back down, what is a real trend that's growing year over year. And the survey it's US based, so it's consumers aged 13 and up. So we also have teenagers all the way up to silent generation. Mm-hmm. It's designed to provide a holistic look at Americans' kind of approaches to health and wellness. A lot of trackers and syndicated data sources are focused on one area or another, whether it's fitness, food, et cetera. And we knew that those fit together in interesting ways that are not always intuitive. So we wanted to be able to look at the whole person and not just one aspect of their engagement with health.
That's great. And it's so important because all of those things are very much interrelated. You can't disentangle your activity from your nutrition, from other aspects of your life. We are all one person. Mm-hmm. Now, we're going to get into a lot of data that's specific to the fitness industry because that's a number of our listeners. I will probably want to ask some questions about some of the other data just because I think in general, it's intriguing. But before we even do that, I think it's important to ask the first question, which is how should our listeners view this data in terms of how they can use it? How do you actually recommend people use the data that you provide? Because I feel like sometimes a lot of data can be a great thing, but other times a lot of data can be an overwhelming thing and almost to the point where like, oh my God, do I need to do something with this? Do I not need to do something with? So I think that's a good starting point to level set. Like, how should we view this data and how might we use it?
That's a great question. So it kind of depends on who you are, I think, and your goals. So one way to use the data, kind of the most obvious way, is just to paint a picture of what is going on at kind of a macro level in the US right now, in terms of trends, in terms of behaviors, like what do people actually do? And again, this is very high level. Now, if you're a marketer, you then take that and you would do something else with it relative to if you were, say, a health professional. So that's where things get a little bit shifty. So if you're a marketer, you're a little bit more interested in aspiration and kind of helping take people where you want them to go. Whereas if you are a health and wellness professional, whether you're in healthcare, whether you're in fitness, whether you're in nutrition, you need to know where people are before you can kind of understand how to help them make changes or understand where they think they are. One important piece of this data is that it's self-reported. So it's stated data. It's what people think they do, which we know is often quite different than what they actually do, particularly when it comes to food and fitness. So this is a nice picture of how active people think they are, how well they think they're eating, the kinds of things that they consider themselves doing in service of those goals. And then so you meet them where they are in terms of what they think. And then depending on, how you want to intervene in that determines kind of the next direction.
Great. So essentially what this data can be used for is understanding where people think they are at with some of them.
Right.
Which is important. Knowing where their mindset is key. Self-reported data, it has its upside and its downside. Clearly, you don't have the resources or the time to physically go out and collect through some objective measure 12,000 pieces of data every single year. But the downside is that you can get a lot of over-reporting of some things, under-reporting of some other. What's your general sense as to that error margin on something like this? Like, what do you think? I don't know if you have an objective measure of it, but
that is a great question. Honestly, I don't have an objective measure. There are different ways that we kind of calibrate, so to speak, the data to kind of get down into the people who are most likely to be reporting their activity more accurately. So we do that just basically through series of questioning. A lot of people say that they exercise on a weekly basis. We know that this is not true from passive activity data from the CDC. But once you start asking them about what activities do you do? How often did you do them? Did you do them yesterday? Did you do them the day before? In the past week, how often did you do them? How long did you do them? Then we can get down, I think, into data that is a little bit more realistic, quote unquote, in terms of what people are actually doing. That kind of diary style questioning is helpful for that. Even so, we know that diary style questioning, people will misremember what they ate yesterday, for instance. So we then do every quarter, we also do a qualitative supplement where we go out and we interview real people. And the specific qualitative methods vary, but that's designed to bring a little bit of life to these numbers, consumer voices, and also understand that gap between what people say they do and what that looks like kind of in a real world basis.
Yeah, that's great. And I just wanted to highlight that because I think when people hear self-reported data, automatically their knee-jerk reaction is, oh, well, this data is worthless because people lie. And it's not. Obviously, it's not 100% factual. And I always like to remind people, like, the goal of science is not to be perfect, but it is the best method we have. And we just have to understand where its constraints stop and where they start.
Yes. And I think that it is important to understand what people think that they're doing. Because you can tell them all the things that you want to, but if they already think that they are living a healthy lifestyle, then your intervention isn't going to really get anywhere. So you need to kind of match how you want to intervene to the consumer and what they already think about themselves.
Yeah, such a great point. Perception is reality on the part of the consumer, and yes, you have to be able to connect with that perception. Let's start to get into some of the data. And I do want to drill down certainly on the fitness data, but on all the other data that's out there. Is there anything before we get more granular into fitness industry specific data that came up that you think, wow, this would be a good piece of information to give to an audience of fitness or wellness professionals outside of the fitness data?
Yes. So we actually just put out a press release, which I can send you the link to, kind of previewing some of the bigger annual trends that we saw this past year, and with predictions for how they'll affect 2022. And so one of the more the kind of the highest scale interesting trend that I think affects fitness and certainly wellness is more people have become engaged with nutrition and healthy eating. More people in 2021 than 2020, and more people in 2020 than 2019. So this could possibly be a long-term kind of positive effect of the pandemic, is that it pushed more people to take their eating more seriously. And unfortunately, those folks didn't come from the kind of part of the population that is not engaged with health. So it wasn't new people becoming engaged with health. It was people who are already engaged, but in a different way. And we found them coming from fitness. And the kind of person that tends to be engaged with fitness, but not nutrition, is younger. So which makes sense, right? It tends to be teenagers, young adults, people in their 20s up to their early 30s, who things haven't quite caught up with them yet. Nutrition engagement increases as you get older. So those folks, a lot of them were already engaged in nutrition and already engaged in fitness and moved into nutrition. And when we see that happen, we see a deeper engagement with both areas. So kind of in retailer terms, it's the same people shopping at the store, but their basket sizes have gotten bigger.
That's a really interesting point. And I think for the business owners and operators that are listening, I think this definitely informs that if that's the shift in consumer behavior, to go back to your supermarket analogy, you better make sure that you have the right food on the shelf for them to be able to buy more, which means making sure you have qualified nutrition professionals available for your clientele.
Right. So these are people that are kind of newly experimenting with healthy eating. They're getting new habits. They're trying new products. And this is a big opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. it's a shame that there aren't more people that weren't engaging in health behaviors that engage in this. But I think that, and even some of your other data is going to bear that out, that is the challenge of our industry, is engaging the non or the under engagers.
Yes, for sure.
So let's get into some of the fitness industry specific data. And there was a lot, and I was feverishly taking notes during your lecture, and that was an exercise in futility. So I just went to your website and looked at some of the information. But let's start to hit on some of the important trends that will inform business decisions in 2022 and beyond for our industry.
Yeah, sure. So some of the data you're referring to that I gave in this talk in Nashville was it was focused on gym members, and I'll start there. So gym members, the number of Americans who say that they're a member of a gym is actually the same now. In Q3 2021, it matched what it was in 2019, right? So in like total number terms, membership has rebounded to where it was before. But the demographics are quite different. So as you probably recall, much more likely to be young, higher proportion of men to women, and then kind of aligning with those younger demographics, more urban, more people with children. And this has pretty big ramifications for both kind of gyms now. So the clients they're serving now are more likely to be younger and male. But also for the future. It means that we still have a large group of people who used to be gym members that have not yet returned. But we also know that they haven't switched to online fitness either, because the type of consumer who uses online fitness or digital fitness, and by that I mean any type of app or platform that you kind of access through the internet, which it includes Peloton all the way down to, apps on your phone. The people who use those regularly are also likely to be younger men. So they have gotten more engaged kind of as a group with fitness. And meanwhile, we have women and older folks who have been kind of left out in the cold. They have not yet come back to the gym yet. They haven't experimented in the same way with these other types of resources. So for the future, we do think that there's a lot of pent up demand there and the question is open. It's even more open now than it was a month ago, thanks to the Omicron variant, as to whether and when they will come back. But if you are kind of the operator of a club or a gym or a fitness studio, if you want to bring them back, you now have a kind of social mix at the gym that might feel a little bit intimidating. You've been catering to a certain type of client for a long time that is very important because they have been sustaining your business. And so you'll have to decide, you have to make some decisions around how, if and when you want to bring in those new members and what you might need to do in your gym to make it feel like a welcoming, safe space for them.
Yeah, that's I did find that fact very, very interesting. And it does reflect what I'm visually seeing in my clubs as well. And I realize as a data analyst, you work with the data, and sometimes a hypothesis on why the data is trending in the direction it's going is maybe a little bit beyond the scope of what some researchers are comfortable with. But I'm just curious to get your opinion, because you're in this all the time. Mm-hmm. Is there a reason why you think the data has trended in this direction?
Well, so we've seen the same patterns across other kind of unrelated data sets. So for instance, regarding dining out or shopping in person at stores, women and Gen X and boomers, so women and older consumers have been just more conscientious about social distancing and cutting down their activities than men and younger consumers have been. Not that men and younger folks didn't do those things, but they didn't do them in kind of the same numbers, mm-hmm. and then not nearly as consistently. So if we're talking about gyms, but also restaurants, women stopped dining out. They stopped going to the gym right away. April, we can see a big drop, and then never went back in the same numbers. Now, this past summer, women started eating out again, but still not in the same numbers as men. So there's just been a lot. I think that speaks to kind of a broader, again, greater conscientiousness, a little bit more carefulness, more cautiousness on the part of the pandemic that is not really going to go away at this point until the pandemic feels fully under control. And, we don't know when that's going to be.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's very interesting. Yeah. There's obviously a psychological element here that making one group feel more comfortable and another group feeling less comfortable. And regardless of the exact reason why, what the data bears out, I think all of us are seeing in our clubs to a great extent. My clubs have a slightly older population in general. A lot of the oldest of the old aren't back. We were always disproportionately more of a female facility than a male facility. Now those numbers seem relatively even. So we've definitely lost, and it changes the environment. And I think just the awareness of that, I think, is important for owners and operators, because it, like you said, it informs how you service your current clientele and members, but also informs what you may need to do in the future to make those women and older members who are coming back feel comfortable coming back into an environment that looks a little bit different in terms of the members that frequent it.
Right. I also think that particularly for women, but I suspect that it's relatively true for older folks as well. Group fitness has been a real loss. Over and over, we see in the data that women's kind of felt experience of the pandemic has been much more negative than men. They're much more likely to say that their, weight and diet suffered. They're more likely to say that they didn't feel motivated to exercise, that they had less time to exercise. And men are consistently more likely to say that things have gotten better. They've had more time. They feel healthier. So, and I suspect that the loss of the gym has been a pretty big part of that. Here was this other space that you could go to that is separate from all your other responsibilities, where the only thing you have to do there is work out. Women do tend to be less engaged with fitness than men, kind of as a whole, as a group. And really the only place where they match is in group fitness. They really like fitness classes. And I think that has been probably a really big loss.
Yeah, indeed. Well, getting into that topic of exercise modality and trends with regard to what kinds of exercise people are doing right now, talk a little bit about how that shifted. I remember that being a big part of the data that you presented.
So actually, overall, the types of activities people do has not shifted very much. People found ways to do their favorite things. One, probably the most important change that we saw, which has now kind of come back up to normal levels, is weight training went down.
Yeah.
Because people couldn't get to the weights. And that has rebounded a bit. But everything else people found ways to do. Now, the data that I showed was about the types of activities that change with age, what goes down among older consumers, what goes up among older consumers.
Yes.
And for older folks, a lot of the activities that they're become more likely to do are actually gym-based activities, things like circuit training, like weight training, a lot of cardio, particularly low intensity or low impact cardio, I should say. All things that the gym is really, really good for, which again, I think speaks to some demand that has yet to be, that's there, but hasn't been met.
Yeah, and I think that is interesting. It is good to know. Ultimately, at the end of the day, and this is very true in our industry, the 50 and up segment has the most time, the most disposable income, and they are a very important population to work with, not just from an economic perspective, but also from a public health perspective. So I think,
yes, for sure,
knowing those trends of what they do and having that inform some of our marketing and our messaging, I think, is important, because I look at a lot of imagery and a lot of messaging for most health and fitness clubs, and it doesn't seem, at least in my experience, to reflect that older population.
No, it really doesn't. So we actually just put out a report where we dug into gender differences and in terms of approaches to nutrition and fitness. And that was one of the things that struck me, is that the kind of as a group, men really, they enjoy relative to women, high intensity, sweaty, like muscle building workouts, the kind of imagery that you see in terms of, gym marketing. But that's the kind of thing that you stop being able to do. Competitive team sports also. And so I wonder if this is a hypothesis again, but I suspect that the way that men engage with fitness, the activities they do probably changes more throughout their lives than women's does, because at every age, women, the activity they're most likely to do is walking. And the next most popular activity is way down the list. Not that there aren't a lot of women involved in, many types of activities, but the number of men who do multiple types of things, particularly team sports and other kinds of high impact activities, is just higher. And that's exactly what drops off the list as you get older, as it becomes more difficult to go out and play basketball or soccer, any of the high impact things. I think the competitive drive is still there, but I wonder if there is a gap, as you said, in terms of what we're selling people and what they actually want and need and can do for older customers and older men in particular.
Yeah, very, very, very interesting. And I always like to say that, if the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again, expecting a different result, I think that's the case with a lot of the marketing and the messaging in our industry. We wonder why we keep getting the same people over and over again.
Right.
It's the same exact messaging and the same exact imagery. So why would you get anybody else?
Exactly. And I think that's what Planet Fitness, recognized so well.
Yeah.
Is with the, no lunks campaign that they did, is this, anybody can come in here at any time, doesn't matter. And we won't have as many of those, the kind of people that intimidate you about going to the gym.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, is that they found an unmet need in the market and they looked to fill it as best as they could. That's a great point. I'd like to take a quick break from today's episode to tell you a little something about one of our sponsors. As all of you are well aware, addressing the wellness paradox is a lifelong passion project for me. And when you're going to go on a long journey, it's difficult to go it alone. You need to find like-minded individuals that are willing to go on that crusade with you. And that's exactly what I found at the MRF Institute. The team over at the MRF Institute creates educational content for fitness and wellness professionals who are serious about becoming a part of our healthcare continuum. Getting on the healthcare continuum is all about leveling up our skills to be looked at as that valued resource provider. The wellness paradox is certainly an avenue for you to do that, but we need many different levers to pull if we're going to get there. And the MRF Institute is definitely one of those levers. You can go to their website, mrfinstitute.org, to find all kinds of great, informative, free informational content. And if you choose to engage with any of their paid content, they've created a coupon code specifically for Wellness Paradox listeners. You can enter in WP 2022, that's WP, and then the number 2022 to the website at checkout to receive a 15% discount on your purchase. I highly recommend you go check out mrfinstitute.org. Now back to today's episode. In terms of trends of people starting to return to the gym, and I fully understand. I hate to break the magic of Hollywood, but we're recording this podcast in the middle of December at this point for a February release. So I hate to break the illusion that this is live to everyone, but we're sitting here. Omicron is just starting to spread in the United States. It's very prevalent around the rest of the world. I don't know where it's going to be at when this podcast actually airs. But prior to that, what were you seeing in terms of trends of returning into the gym? Were we seeing any positive movement in terms of the older demographic, in terms of the female demographic, or was it staying consistent?
We were. So in Q3, for the first time since the pandemic had happened, significant numbers of women had reported having gym memberships. And, that difference is only a few percentage points. I want to say it went from like 24 to 27%. I can tell you if you just give me a minute. And then Gen X and boomers were starting to tick back up, but not quite to statistically significant levels. And I think that this has probably put a damper on all that, which is really unfortunate because it was such a positive movement. Yeah. So between Q2 and Q3, the number of women, this is fitness engaged women. So I should say fitness engaged is usually around 65% of the population. The number of fitness engaged women who report having gym memberships went from 22% up to 27%.
Okay.
Which is a pretty nice jump. And again, the first time we have seen that.
Yeah, that's encouraging because at that point, Q2 to Q3, like Delta was still a thing at that point. So it suggests that some of those people are comfortable. I'm curious what Omicron will do to some of these statistics. I know just personally, like anecdotally looking at my facilities, we're just a smidge slower right now than what we have been. And it's also hard for me to disentangle Omicron from the holidays right now and people just having stuff to do.
Yeah. And that's been really difficult actually this whole pandemic because the waves correspond with the seasons.
Yeah.
And what that means in the data is that we're having these really severe seasonal shifts that didn't used to happen. And it's hard to untangle what's COVID, what is people trying to like get back on the horse or engage with life again, what happens every spring or every fall. It's been a kind of a wild ride.
Yeah. Very interesting time to be collecting data and trying to understand it. What else do you think is good, relevant data points for the fitness and wellness professionals that are listening to hear, or that are listening, and what they should hear from some of the research you've done?
Well, I think that we've also seen this big rise in mindfulness, and that has impacts for the fitness industry. So the number of Americans who do some kind, or again, report doing some kind of mindfulness behavior weekly, whether that's journaling, meditation, kind of stress management exercises, went up 7 percentage points from basically Q3 2019 to Q3 2021. So that's a nice jump. And it's higher for people who are actually engaged with fitness and nutrition.
Okay.
And in fact, it's mostly those people who are already engaged with health who added mindfulness on top of it. And they have we think that like adding mindfulness on top of their other engagement ends up deepening engagement with health across all three, because what we heard qualitatively is that mindfulness component helps people stay motivated and focused on their long-term goals in a new and different way. And then they end up spending more across all fitness categories. They're more likely to engage in behaviors more regularly, including exercise, going to the gym. They feel more positively about buying things to support their habits. So they're a really valuable consumer to have. But they do have a slightly different approach to fitness than other people, because it's less about these short-term goals that often bring people to the gym on January 1st, right? They're not interested necessarily. Losing weight might be a nice side benefit, but they're really interested in something that's more holistic. It's higher quality of life for longer. It's feeling better now. It's keeping myself motivated to eat right and to exercise and to do, whatever my mindfulness ritual is on a daily basis. It makes me better at work. It makes me a better parent. It's a much more holistic engagement with all aspects of health, in addition to being more willing to support their habits in a physical and tangible way.
That's great. That sounds like the perfect consumer in my mind. I would much rather have somebody who said, this is not about just the weight I'm going to lose in the next month. This is about my long-term health for the next 5 years. Sounds like, just from what you said there and from looking at your data, that is also much like we talked about nutrition in the beginning. That seems like that's also a very important customer segment to be able to provide a level of service to.
Yeah, I think so. And I know that we talked at the conference that you mentioned about shifting from this kind of very fitness focused mindset to a wellness mindset, where, fitness is a path to wellness, and not just, weight loss or muscles or whatever. And that's a big shift. Going back to what you were saying about the marketing for the fitness industry, it's still about looking good and, impressing people, things like that. And this is not what mindfulness consumers are after at all. It's a much more holistic way. It's not necessarily about the calories you burn or the reps you do. It's about how you feel afterwards, and carrying that feeling through to the rest of your life.
Yeah, it's very interesting, a very different approach to why people exercise than I think what the typical gym goer has as a motivation. You mentioned earlier, you talked about, I believe if I have the number right, that 65% of the population that you survey that says they engage in some sort of fitness or exercise type of activity. I'm curious if you have any thoughts or data on what's happening in that other 35%. Like what's their mindset? What's their barriers? Because I think everyone who's listening is going, great. Okay, well, yeah, I can really communicate well with the 65% of people, but like,
right.
What about those other 35%? Do you have any insight from your data?
Well, so a chunk of those, maybe like 15% ish, are engaged with nutrition,
Okay,
but not fitness.
Oh, okay.
And demographically, though, that group is more likely to be women and older.
Okay.
And so a lot of them probably have never been engaged with fitness because they are from a generation where women were not encouraged to do that. And so fitness is a hard sell because it doesn't feel very natural. Even though it would be a good add-on.
Yeah.
And then the remaining, it's about 18% of Americans they don't do anything even aspirationally with fitness or with healthy eating. That's an uphill climb because it's a very stable population.
Yeah.
It does not change very much. And the demographics within it are stable. It's interesting and also kind of like really frustrating to look at them. A lot of they tend to skew younger as a group. So some of it is, I think, just not feeling like you need to worry about your health yet. Health hasn't become a priority for them. And so, it's possible that they become engaged as they get older. But a really high percentage simply think that they don't need to worry about it. They think that they're healthy already. And when people think that, it's very difficult to convince them otherwise. We have kind of deep dived into this group to find out who might be the low-hanging fruit in terms of getting them engaged, because a fair number of these folks, they're very inactive also, I should say. Like less than half say that they exercise once a year.
Wow.
It's pretty remarkable. And again, this is stated data, but if you're putting that, knowing that you're supposed to be exercising, then I think it's probably not too far from the truth. However, a good chunk of them do sporadically engage with these things, whether it's exercise or they might start a diet and stop. Exercise is the more common one, but just can't have trouble developing habits around it. And what we see in the data is that so we ask about consumers' personal priorities, and these include things like diet, weight, fitness, your physical health, but also work-life balance, spending time with friends and family, traveling, advancing in my career. So we want to get a sense of where health and wellness falls relative to these other things. And there's some mental health is a part of that too. So they share the same priorities generally as everyone else. But then what we see is that their grades, we ask people to give themselves a letter grade on each of these priorities. Their grades are much lower. And then they're also more likely to have kind of negative attitudes around other aspects of their lives. And so and I should say in terms of their priorities, where they differ is that health and wellness is much lower. So all the physical health, the diet, the fitness piece, all of those are lower than the general population. And so what that says to me is this lack of focus on health has negative ramifications. If that's the only way that they're different, and yet we see attitudinally, they seem to be struggling much more with kind of living up to their priorities, then not focusing on their health has negative consequences throughout the rest of their lives. So, getting those people involved would be great. But again, it's such a stable population that says that that tells me that it's very difficult. It's an uphill climb. A lot of them report they're more likely than the general population and more likely than people who are engaged with health in some way to say that basically that health was not modeled for them in their childhood homes. So we ask about, various things that might have happened in your childhood home. So they're much likely to say that anybody did any exercise, that they participated in exercise as a family, that they felt like healthy eating was modeled. So there's probably a lack of examples going on as well. And then demographically, so I said they skew younger. So aligning with that younger skew, there's lower education and income levels. Keeping in mind this includes teenagers, right? Who don't even have high school degrees yet. But the age skew doesn't explain all of that. So there is like a lack of resources and probably a lack of knowledge going on here too. That is again difficult to correct.
What a fascinating look under the hood of that population. I think as fitness and wellness professionals, our mindset is so different than that it's always fascinating whenever we can kind of peek under the hood and see, at least to the extent we can, what's going on there.
Yeah, I think there's this assumption that everybody cares about health, and it's just, it's not true.
Yes. A lot of data, Sarah, and a lot of fascinating data. And as we're coming to the end here, I'm probably going to ask you some of the hardest questions I've asked you thus far, because it's going to ask you to get specific with some things.
Okay.
Looking at your data in its totality right now, and speaking to the fitness and wellness professionals that are listening, if there was one take-home message that the data is telling you right now that we need to be considering, maybe as an industry, what's the one take-home message?
That's a great question. I think that, coming from the data, I think we're in for a continuing rocky ride, especially in the fitness industry. This next year is just going to bring just as many changes and shifts as this year. Especially with this new variant, we're not in a normal now, and it's not going to be normal for a long time. And that makes it difficult to plan. It makes it difficult to plan in your private life, and it certainly makes it difficult to plan if you're a business. But that said, in terms of your mission of like meeting the gap between fitness and wellness, I think that data and understanding macro trends and helps you meet people where they are, both in terms of perception and reality, as we've been discussing. And then what's necessary after that depends on the person, but I've interviewed now, hundreds of people about health and wellness. And one of my takeaways, besides that you should eat a salad every day, is that positive motivations are always going to be more powerful than negative motivations. People don't change, particularly around health, they don't change out of fear. They don't change out of shame. They don't change because somebody told them what to do. They really have to choose life and choose health and turn their mindset into that positive hope, a positive vision to make a real change in their behaviors. That's great. Yes. First, some sobering but important thoughts there to start, that we are still in for a rocky ride and we need to strap in for that. But what you said there in the latter portion of your answer, I think is encouraging and important to realize as well, that this is very much from a gain frame perspective rather than from a loss frame, not like what are you preventing, which is a lot of the messaging that's out there to a great extent, but more what are you gaining from it? And I think that's important for informing messaging. Yeah, and it can help make the incremental changes that we know are kind of most beneficial for people. And I think, again, shifting to a wellness perspective and away from, a focus on fitness by itself is helpful for that. you have to meet people where they are so that you can know how to intervene, but then you have to also intervene in a way that is sustainable, something that people can maintain over time and do every day, which is not, a hardcore diet. It's not, you have to go to the gym 90 days or 90 minutes every day, right? It's building in a little bit more activity into your life every day.
Yeah. Well, you gave us the sobering thought that we're not out of the woods yet, which, to be fair, you're not the first person that's told any of us that, but
I wish we were. I was so hopeful.
I wish we were too, but let's try to move towards ending this on a positive note. Despite that fact, what gives you hope for the health, fitness, and wellness of our nation based upon the data you're seeing? Where's the hope in all this data?
I think there's actually a lot of hope. So as I said before, we see year over year increases in the numbers of people that are engaged with nutrition. That works out to almost 12 million more Americans engaged with nutrition now than were 2 years ago, which is not a small number. So that's great, because that's something that, Americans do really need to focus on, and not just us, but we do. We also see, kind of in line with all this news about the Great Resignation, we have seen since last year, people really doing hard assessments of their priorities and values, and then taking action now to live their values in a way that they didn't before. So the pandemic kind of forced people to look at their lives, but also helped them understand what they enjoyed, what they could leave behind, and how they wanted to move forward. And we see data that supports action happening on that as well, particularly among millennials. And those are the people in their kind of prime years of life, right? They have the jobs, they have families now. They're in that big shift that happens, and you're between 30 and 45 when you start thinking about yourself, not necessarily as a young person for whom it doesn't matter what you do, but now it does matter. The stakes are higher, you want to live longer. So that, to me, that speaks very positively. More millennials have become engaged in health year over year since every year since 2019. So that this is setting us up, I hope, for a healthier population in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is hope in that. But there's the reality that we're currently facing, but it's good to know that we are moving in a positive direction, hopefully as a whole. All this information is fascinating. And like I said, I've been on your website, Murphy Research website, to try to mine some of the data. I'm sure a lot of people that are listening to this are data nerds like me, and they're like, oh man, I'd like to look at more of this rather than just hear Sarah talk about it. For our listeners that want to find out more about the things that you're doing, the things that Murphy Research is doing, these data sets, how can they connect with that? Where's the best place to go?
A couple of spots. One is definitely the website, which is murphyresearch.com. We have a blog where we post little kind of research snippets here and there. The State of Our Health Tracker is a subscription-based service, so you do have to pay for it. But we also we speak to the press a lot. We do podcasts. So as I said, we have a press release out now, and I believe that we'll be kind of turning that into kind of either a social post or, a white paper that's available on the kind of macro trends that we saw from last year moving into next year. So if people have specific questions, I welcome them to email me at smarion@murphyresearch.com. And I'm happy to try to find a solution to get people the information that they're interested in. And I know all the places where it lives too. So
awesome. Yeah, we'll link up to all that in the show notes page. And just to expand on what Sarah said there, I reached out to Sarah originally because I was interested in looking at some of the data for my own business. And to her credit, the first thing she tried to do was not sell me something. It was, hey, here's all these resources that are out there. Check these things out and then see if that answers your question. So Sarah and the team at Murphy Research are a great resource for us. And I think I didn't even know, and I've been in the industry for 23 years, I didn't even know that this data existed. And I think it's an amazing resource for us. So we will link up to all that in the show notes, which brings me to the final question that I have for you. And I always enjoy asking this question to people that are not I'm going to go in air quotes here, fitness or medical people, because you have a different perspective. And I think our industry greatly needs different perspectives. But final question here is, I believe the wellness paradox is the trust, interaction, and communication gap between fitness and wellness professionals and medical professionals. And this podcast is about trying to close off that gap. For the fitness professionals that are listening, if you had one piece of advice you can give them from your perspective to close that gap off, what would it be?
It's a good question. Well, I said earlier, meeting people where they are, but I think the focus on wellness makes fitness a lot more inclusive than I think it has seemed to many people in the past. And I'm talking about perception again here. And we know that fitness professionals do want to help people get well. But there is the intimidation factor, like getting people into the door of a health club or a gym so that they can actually speak to somebody is difficult. But I think expanding that to focus on wellness expands the market for what fitness means and can be and who wants to be involved. And then I think from the other end, this is it's very prescriptive, but I think prescriptions and incentives for exercise from healthcare, I think those work. I think that is a public good that needs to be supported in a more thorough, like systemic fashion. We know that our bodies were designed to move, but we have designed environments for ourselves where we don't have to move very much. And we need to address that. And one way to do it is doctor's orders.
Absolutely.
And financial support.
Indeed. Very informative perspective for someone not in either of those respective fields. Sarah Marion, thank you so much for joining us on the Wellness Paradox.
Thank you. This was a pleasure.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Sarah as much as I did. If you found it insightful and informative, please share with your friends and colleagues. Those shares really do make a difference for us. Any additional information that we'd like to share with you from this episode can be found by going to the show notes page at wellnessparadoxpod.com/episode 39. Please be on the lookout for next week's episode when it drops on Wednesday. And if you have a moment, please do leave us a review on your favorite podcast platforms. Those reviews make a huge difference for us. Until we chat again, please be well.